7-year-old Lily Kane ran 3 blocks through the cold Oakland night before she found the garage. She didn't stop at the front door. She didn't knock. She hit those steel doors at full speed, both palms flat, and burst through them like something was still behind her. The music stopped. The air wrenches stopped. Every man in that room, leather-jacketed, scarred, tattooed down to the knuckles, froze. "Daddy!" Her voice broke on that single word. "A man tried to take me." And Ryder Calloway, vice president of the Iron Veil MC, a man who'd walked through firefights in Fallujah without flinching, felt every nerve in his body turn to ice. The garage went quiet enough to hear the winter wind pressing against the walls. That silence was the most dangerous sound in Oakland. Hey, if you're watching this right now, you need to stay until the end. This one is going to gut you. Drop a like if you're already feeling it, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I've got viewers from all over the world on these stories, and I want to know where you are tonight. All right, let's go. The October cold had been building for 3 days over Oakland's industrial waterfront, the kind of cold that didn't just bite. It settled into the bones and stayed there. It rolled off the bay in long gray waves, pushed through the alley gaps between warehouses, and found every crack in every window in the neighborhood. By 6 in the evening, the street lamps were already orange halos in the mist, and the loading docks along Harbor Industrial Way sat mostly empty, except for the occasional rumble of a late delivery truck grinding down the cracked asphalt. Iron Veil Customs occupied the end unit of a converted warehouse complex on the edge of the district, a building that had once processed shipping containers and now housed 7 hydraulic lifts, a parts room the size of a small apartment, a fabrication bay that smelled permanently of hot metal and grinding sparks, and a back office where the club's paperwork got done in a way that would have made a legitimate accountant's head spin. From the outside, it looked like any other garage. Steel rolled doors, a hand-painted sign in block letters above the entrance, a small parking area out front with 4 Harleys and a dented pickup truck. Nothing that said anything except working men work here and strangers aren't welcome. Inside, the overhead speakers were pushing out a classic rock station at medium volume, something with a long guitar solo that nobody was really listening to. And the smell was the usual layered mixture of motor oil, metal dust, burned coffee from the pot that had been on the burner since noon, and the faint ghost of cigarette smoke that never fully left the walls no matter how many times someone cracked a window. Ryder Calloway was under a 1991 Softail Custom that belonged to a civilian customer, lying flat on a creeper with a torque wrench in one hand and a flashlight clenched between his teeth when he heard the doors. He heard them before he saw anything. The steel doors of the main bay had a specific sound when they were opened with force, a deep metallic bang that the hydraulic mechanism couldn't fully cushion. And he'd been hearing that sound for years and knew the difference between someone yanking them open with a purpose and someone bumping into them by accident. This was force. This was running. He rolled out from under the bike and was already sitting up when Lily came through. She was still in her school clothes. Blue jeans, a yellow sweatshirt with a cartoon bear on the front, sneakers with the Velcro straps she'd been meaning to replace with laces. Her backpack was hanging off one shoulder, half unzipped, the way she always wore it. Her hair was wild around her face, both cheeks flushed dark red from the cold and from crying, and her eyes, brown like her mother's, wide like a caught animal's, found him the second she was through the door. "Daddy!" Just the one word, just his name, split down the middle into a sound that wasn't quite a word anymore, just pure signal. And then her knees buckled slightly and she grabbed the doorframe. Ryder was on his feet before the word finished leaving her mouth. The torque wrench hit the concrete floor with a metallic clang that rang through the bay. Behind him, he heard Dex Marlowe, his oldest road brother, built like a refrigerator and twice as cold to strangers, stop working. He heard Torres put down whatever he'd been grinding. He heard the room change. That was the only way to describe it. The room changed, the way a room does when something fundamental shifts in the air and every body in the space registers it at once on a frequency below language. Ryder crossed the bay in 8 steps and caught his daughter before she could fold all the way to the floor. She was shaking. He could feel it in her arms and in her chest, and in the way her fingers grabbed his shirt, like she intended to take fistfuls of fabric with her if anything tried to pull her away. He got down on one knee on the oil-stained concrete and held her at arm's length long enough to look at her face, checking her the way a man who'd done 2 combat tours checked everything. Systematically, fast, looking for damage. No blood. No visible injuries. Eyes tracking, present. What happened? It wasn't a question. It was the voice he used when he needed the facts first. Lily dragged in a breath that sounded like it hurt. "A man," she said. "Outside school. By the fence." Another breath. "He knew my name, Daddy. He knew my name, and he said your name. He said Ryder. He said, 'Tell your daddy Ryder that he needs to talk to me.' And then he opened the car door and Her voice cracked. "He tried to get me to get in." The temperature in the room dropped 6 degrees that had nothing to do with weather. "What kind of car?" Ryder's voice was very flat now. "Silver. It was big and silver, really shiny." "Did you see the plates?" She shook her head. "I ran. Coach Martinez saw, and he came out and the car left and Coach called the police and they came and I told them and they said they'd look into it and they drove me home, but—" She stopped. "But home was empty. And I didn't want to be home alone, so I walked here." Ryder pulled her into his chest. She went willingly, completely, burying her face in his leather cut and grabbing 2 fistfuls of the back of his shirt. He held her with both arms, and he kept his eyes open and he looked at the floor of his garage, and he breathed, slowly and deliberately. The way a man breathes when he's making sure no one in the room sees what's happening behind his face. Behind him, nobody said a word. But he heard Dex move, heard the soft clink of Dex picking something up off his workbench, heard Torres step to the bay door and look out at the street, heard Priest, who was barely 25 and the newest patch among them, move quietly to the side window. Without a single instruction, the room had reorganized itself into something that looked a great deal like a perimeter. "You did good," Ryder told his daughter. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. "Coming here." That was exactly right. He pulled back enough to look at her face again. "Go to the back office. Couch is clear. There's a blanket in the cabinet under the TV. You're going to sit there and you're going to be okay. Can you do that?" Lily looked at him for a long moment. She had her mother's way of reading him, that quality of attention that went past the surface of his face and looked at something underneath. He'd never been entirely comfortable with it. Even at 7, his daughter had it. "Are you going to fix it?" she asked. "Go sit down, Bug." She went. Ryder stood up from his knee. He turned to face his brothers. Dex had a rag in one hand and he was wiping nothing off his fingers. It was a habit, the same way other men lit cigarettes when they needed to think. Torres had come back from the bay door and was standing with his arms crossed, jaw set, watching Ryder with an expression that communicated nothing specific and everything general. Priest was still at the window. "Silver luxury sedan," Ryder said. "Knew her name, knew mine. Tried to get her in the car outside her school." The rag in Dex's hand stopped moving. "Outside Lakeview?" "Yeah." "When she said he knew your name," Torres spoke carefully, "she mean your road name or your given name?" Ryder hadn't asked. He needed to ask. But the fact that Torres had gone there immediately told him they were all already thinking the same thing. This wasn't random. This was targeted. This was someone who knew enough to use his daughter as a message. "Pull the garage cameras," Ryder said. "School is 2 blocks off Harbor. If that car came from the Bayside, it would have crossed our intersection." Dex was already moving toward the office where the NVR system lived. "And someone call O'Brien at the precinct," Ryder added. "Not to report it, just to find out what the uniforms actually logged when they responded to the school." Torres had his phone out before the sentence was finished. Ryder walked to his workbench and stood there for a moment with both hands flat on the surface. The guitar solo on the radio had ended. Some DJ was talking about the weather. Cold front pushing down from the north, temperatures dropping overnight. He reached over and turned the radio off. He needed to hear the room. He needed to hear his daughter in the back office, settling onto the couch, the small sounds of a child making herself safe in a familiar place. He stood there, and he listened, and he felt something moving through him that he'd felt before, not anger, not exactly, something older, something that lived below anger in the architecture of a man who'd spent 2 years watching friends die in the dust, and then spent 8 more years trying to figure out how to live in a world where the dying didn't follow the same rules. He'd learned to wall it off. He'd learned to put it somewhere that couldn't reach the rest of him. It was reaching now. The camera system covered 4 angles outside the building, and Dex had it queued up on the office monitor by the time Ryder came back there. Lily was on the couch with the blanket pulled up to her chin, eyes tracking him when he came in, and he gave her one look that he meant to be reassuring and that she received with the same quiet assessment she always gave him. He pulled the office door mostly closed and stood behind Dex's chair and watched the footage. The timestamp showed 4:47 p.m. School ended at 3:15. Lily walked the usual route. He'd mapped it himself, counted the intersections, identified every security camera, knew which storefronts had owners who would intervene if something happened. She came into frame at the corner of Harbor and 5th, moving at normal pace, backpack on, head down against the wind. Then she stopped. Off the right edge of the frame, just barely caught by the wide angle, the front end of a large silver vehicle was visible. Parked. Someone was outside it. A shape, partially obscured by the angle. Ryder watched his daughter's body language change on the screen. He watched her stiffen. He watched a brief exchange. He watched her step back once, twice. And then she ran. The vehicle pulled forward into full frame for exactly 4 seconds before turning onto Harbor and accelerating west. 4 seconds was enough. "Freeze it," Ryder said. Dex froze the frame. The vehicle was a current model silver Cadillac Escalade, black rims, dark-tinted windows. And in the bottom right corner of the windshield, barely visible, but there if you knew how to look, a small blue parking placard. Government issue. Torres appeared in the doorway. O'Brien says the incident report is filed as a level 2 suspicious contact. They knocked on 6 doors in the neighborhood, didn't find the vehicle, and flagged it for follow-up. The pause that followed was specific. He said, and this is his word, that the responding officer noted the contact was likely a misunderstanding given the family's associations. The silence that followed that sentence lasted approximately 3 seconds. "He said that," Dex said. "Word for word." Ryder looked at the frozen frame on the monitor. He looked at the parking placard. He looked at his daughter on the couch behind him, eyes closed now, the blanket pulled all the way up, one hand tucked under her cheek. "Government plate," he said quietly. "I see it," Dex said. "Get Ghost on the phone." Ghost. Marcus Webb, who'd done 3 years doing signals intelligence before a roadside device, had taken most of the hearing in his left ear and the Army's patience with his personality in the same afternoon, was the club's answer to questions that didn't have official answers. He lived 40 minutes north in a ranch house full of screens and mismatched server towers and a cat named Hendrix, and he was the reason the Iron Veil had never been caught doing anything the ATF couldn't definitively prove, and the reason several people who'd tried to do things to club members had found their lives becoming very complicated very quickly. Ghost answered on the second ring. "I need a plate run," Ryder said. "Government vehicle, California. I've got a partial from security footage and a blue parking placard visible on the windshield." "Send me the freeze frame." Ryder took a photo of the monitor with his phone and sent it. The line stayed open. He could hear Ghost typing. He could hear Hendrix making a sound somewhere in the background. He stood in the doorway of the office and watched his daughter breathe under the blanket and listened to the silence of the garage behind him. 4 other men, all of them doing nothing, all of them waiting, which was the most eloquent thing they could possibly be doing. "Okay." Ghost's voice had the particular quality it got when he'd found something and was deciding how to frame it. "The placard is a city-issued government pass registered to the Office of Community Development. Specific registrant is..." A pause that lasted 1 beat too long. "Victor Langford, Commissioner, current head of the city's Safe Streets Initiative." Ryder said nothing. "You know who that is?" Ghost asked. "I know who that is." Victor Langford had been in the Oakland Tribune 4 times in the last 6 months. Ryder had read every one of those articles because every one of them had mentioned Iron Veil Customs by name as an example of what Langford called predatory neighborhood institutions that exploit community trust while operating outside legal accountability. The man had been pushing a zoning reclassification that would have forced 3 businesses in the district, including the garage, to either relocate or close. He'd held 2 public meetings about it. He'd gotten his picture taken shaking hands with the mayor. He was polished, church-going, silver-haired, and perpetually quoted as a voice of civic responsibility. He had also, apparently, just tried to put Ryder Calloway's 7-year-old daughter in his car. "Send me everything you have on him," Ryder said. "Home address, regular schedule, vehicle registrations, all of them. Any properties under his name or a family name or a shell, any LLC or nonprofit associated with him." Ghost was already typing. "What happened?" "My daughter." The typing stopped. "I'm sending everything I have and I'm pulling more," Ghost said. "Give me 2 hours." "You've got 90 minutes. Ryder ended the call. He went back into the main bay. The 4 men there, Dex, Torres, Priest, and Cabo, who'd come in through the side entrance sometime in the last 20 minutes with the sixth sense Road Brothers seemed to develop for when the weather changed, were arranged in a loose cluster near the center of the bay, not quite looking at each other, not quite looking away, doing the thing men do when they're waiting for direction and trying not to look like they're waiting for direction. Ryder stood in front of them. He didn't need to explain the situation. They'd heard enough. They'd seen enough from the doorway and the monitors and Torres's phone call. What he needed to decide right now, what the next 60 seconds required of him, wasn't intelligence. It was direction. "This is not a club problem yet," he said. "This is my problem. Anyone who wants to walk away from it right now, no words, no history, just walk." Nobody moved. Langford is a city commissioner with press coverage and a staff. Whatever he's doing it from inside a structure that's built to protect him. That means we don't go near him half-cocked. We go with everything we have. He looked at each of them in turn. "Tonight we find out what he is. Then we decide what to do about it." Dex tossed the rag onto the workbench. "I've been waiting 8 months for an excuse to find out what that man is." "You'll wait another 90 minutes, Ryder said. "Clean and sober. All of you." He got no argument. He went back to the office, moved carefully past the couch where Lily was sleeping. Fully asleep now. Her breath gone slow and steady, her mouth slightly open the way it always was when she was deep under, and sat down at the desk. He opened the laptop and looked at the screen without seeing it for a moment. Then he pulled up the Tribune's digital archive and read every article that mentioned Victor Langford from the beginning. He read the way he'd been trained to read, not for the information in the words, but for the information around the words, the shape of what was being protected, the pattern of what was being obscured. What a man chose to make visible about himself was always less interesting than what he chose to keep in the dark. Langford's public record was immaculate in the way that made Ryder's stomach tighten. 2 decades of civic service, a foundation in his wife's name, she'd passed 3 years ago, cancer, he'd been very public about the grief, that nominally served at-risk youth in underserved neighborhoods. Quarterly events, photo opportunities. The foundation had distributed small grants to 6 community organizations in the last fiscal year. 2 of those organizations were in neighborhoods with high concentrations of children in foster care or living with single parents. One of them ran an after-school program. Another ran a summer camp. Ryder read it all. By the time Ghost's files came through on the encrypted channel, his coffee had gone cold, and his jaw ached from the unconscious pressure he'd been putting on it. He opened Ghost's package and started reading. The first layer was standard. Property holdings. A home in the Piedmont Hills. A second property in Carmel listed under a family trust. A commercial property in San Jose currently generating rental income. Vehicle registrations. The Escalade, a hybrid sedan. A boat registered at a marina in Alameda. Financials that looked clean on the surface and that Ghost had noted, in his particular shorthand, were too clean in specific places that he'd highlighted. The second layer was what Ghost had flagged as requiring additional access, which was Ghost's way of saying he'd gone somewhere he wasn't supposed to go and found something that justified the trip. Langford had a secondary email account, not his city-issued address, not the foundation account, hosted through a private provider out of Eastern Europe. Ghost had gotten into the account's metadata, not the content itself, but the metadata was enough. The account had been active for 4 years. It communicated with 11 recurring addresses. 3 of those addresses resolved to known anonymizing proxies. One resolved to an IP address associated with a property management company in Fremont that Ghost had cross-referenced against the county's missing persons database. There were 14 missing persons reports from Fremont and the surrounding area in the last 3 years. 11 of them were under the age of 14. Ryder read that line 3 times. He read it the first time with his mind. He read it the second time with something lower down. He read it the third time with the place in him that had no name. The place that had been built in 2 years of war and 15 years of surviving peace and 8 years of raising a daughter alone after her mother left and left and left and never came all the way back. The place that had seen the worst of what men did to each other and to the people around them and had learned to recognize it by the smell, by the shape, by the particular texture of the silence that surrounded it. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark of his office and listened to his daughter breathe. Outside in the bay, he could hear his brothers moving. Low voices, the sound of coffee being poured, somebody's boot hitting the leg of a stool. The ordinary sounds of men in a space they knew, waiting, the way soldiers waited, not with agitation, but with that particular stillness that was more dangerous than agitation because it had no energy it needed to spend. He sat for 3 minutes by the clock on the wall. Then he stood up, buttoned his cut, and walked out to his brothers. "We're going to his house tonight," he said. "Ghost is sending a layout of the property. We go quiet, we go clean, and we don't do anything until we know exactly what we're looking at." He looked at the 5 faces in front of him. "This stays in this room until we know more. We don't know what we have yet." "We know what tried to take your daughter," Torres said. "We know one thing. I need to know all of it before I decide what to do about it." That was enough. That was more than enough for the men in this room. They began to prepare. The Langford property in the Piedmont Hills was a gated residence on a private road, which in the Piedmont Hills meant it was almost aggressively visible in its invisibility. A large house behind mature trees and an automated gate, the kind of address that communicated security through the sheer density of what surrounded it. Nice neighborhood. Old money aesthetics on a public official's salary, which was the first thing that should have bothered somebody, but apparently never had. Ghost had sent structural information pulled from the county assessor's records, footprint, square footage, addition permits that gave a rough sense of interior layout, and satellite imagery that was 8 months old but good enough. The gate was keypad coded, but Ghost had also flagged a secondary pedestrian access point on the north side of the property where the fence line met a neighbor's retaining wall and was obscured from the street by a mature oak that predated the fence itself. 6 men left the garage at 11:30 p.m. They took 2 vehicles, Torres's pickup and Cabo's SUV, and drove separately and arrived on separate streets and came together on foot in the darkness of the hill road north of the property. No club cuts. Work jackets, dark clothing, boots. Priest had wanted to wear his cut, and Ryder had given him a look that ended the conversation in under a second. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s. Their breath came out in small plumes under the orange glow of the private road's discreet amber street lamps. The city spread out below them in a wash of lights. The bay a dark mirror in the distance. The bridges strung with illumination. The sprawl of Oakland, and beyond it, the dim far shore of the peninsula. Ryder didn't look at it. He was looking at the north fence line. They went over at the oak tree, Dex first because Dex had the arms for it and the silence, then Torres, then the others. The grounds were well kept in a way that was expensively maintained, lawn, mature plantings, a stone path leading to a pool that was covered for the season. The main house was a 2-story colonial revival with a double-door entry and ground floor lights visible through the closed curtains of what looked like a study on the east side of the building. Langford was home. Ryder had expected this. A man conducting business from inside a position of civic trust tended to do that business from the physical security of his own property. He'd be comfortable here. Comfortable and therefore careless. They came to the study window. Through the gap at the curtain's edge, Ryder could see a desk lamp, a large monitor, a bookshelf of the decorative kind, and a man sitting in a leather chair. Silver hair. Wire-rimmed glasses. Victor Langford in a cardigan and reading glasses, at 11:30 p.m., alone in his study. He didn't look dangerous. That was the thing about men like this. They were specifically designed not to look dangerous. Dex tried the side door, a service entrance off the kitchen that Ghost had identified as the property's weakest point, and it opened on the third technique he tried, and they were inside without a sound. Through the kitchen, granite countertops, stainless appliances, a half-empty bottle of expensive scotch on the island, and into the short hallway that led to the study. And then Ryder pushed the study door open and walked in, and Langford looked up from his monitor, and the color left his face so completely and so instantly that it looked like someone had turned off a light inside him. The six of them filled the room. Langford's mouth opened. No sound came out. "Don't," Ryder said. Langford closed his mouth. For a long moment, nobody moved. Ryder stood in front of the desk and looked at the man in the chair, and Victor Langford looked back at him with the eyes of someone who had just discovered that the protections he'd built around himself did not in fact cover every possible scenario. "My daughter," Ryder said. "Today. Outsider school. Silver Escalade. Government plates." Langford's throat moved. He swallowed twice. "I don't know what you're Don't." The word was quiet and flat, and it landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "We have the footage, we have the plate, we have your secondary email account, and we have the IP addresses, and we have the connection to 11 missing children in Fremont." Ryder leaned forward, hands on the edge of the desk, and his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Don't tell me you don't know what I'm talking about." Langford looked at the men behind Ryder. He was calculating. Ryder could see it in the rapid movement of his eyes, counting, assessing, looking for the play. This was a man who'd spent decades making situations work for him. A man who'd built an entire public identity as a mechanism for staying safe. He was looking for the lever. "Whatever you think you know," he started. "Show me the computer," Ryder said. "I have nothing to eat." "Show me the computer," Ryder said again, "or I leave Dex in this room while the rest of us wait outside." Langford looked at Dex. Dex didn't change his expression. He didn't need to. Langford turned back to his monitor. His hands moved to the keyboard with the slow, resigned quality of a man who had just recalculated his odds and found them catastrophically different from what he'd believed 30 seconds ago. He opened a folder, then another. A password prompt appeared, and he typed it, and the folder opened. Ryder looked at what was on the screen. He looked at it for 10 seconds. Then he reached past Langford, took the desk lamp, and angled it so it lit the monitor clearly, and he stepped back, and he looked at it properly, and the temperature in the room dropped below whatever the thermometer could measure. There were files, dozens of them, organized with a precision that turned Ryder's stomach because it was the precision of something that had been done carefully, deliberately, over a long period of time. There were photographs. There were records. There were names. Children's names. Behind him, he heard the sound of Torres exhaling through his teeth. He heard Priest take one slow step backward. He heard Dex make a sound he'd never heard from Dex before. A sound that wasn't loud, that was in fact very quiet, which made it infinitely worse. Ryder looked at Victor Langford, who had stopped pretending and was looking at the desk surface and breathing through his nose in long, measured intervals, like a man trying to stay composed in a situation that no longer merited composure. "How many?" Ryder said. Langford didn't answer. "How many?" Silence. Ryder's right hand had moved to the back of his waistband at some point in the last 30 seconds, a movement he hadn't consciously made, and his fingers were resting on the grip of the Glock he carried there, and his body was doing something his mind had not yet been given the authority to authorize. He was aware of this. He was aware of the specific quality of stillness that had settled over the room. He was aware of the 6 inches between where his hand was and where it would need to go. He was aware of his daughter's face. Not as he'd last seen her, asleep on the couch, safe, one hand tucked under her cheek. Earlier than that. Outside the garage, when she'd first come through those steel doors. The look on her face that was simultaneously the most terrifying thing he'd ever seen and the most clarifying. He was aware that he was standing at the precise edge of something that could not be undone. "Ghost," Ryder said quietly, without moving his eyes from Langford, "I need you on the phone. Right now." He pulled out his cell and called, and Ghost answered in 2 rings, and Ryder said, I need you to tell me the fastest way to copy everything off a computer and get it somewhere that can't be touched. A pause. How much is everything? Ghost asked. Ryder looked at the screen again. More than you want to know about. Ghost started talking, and in the study of a Piedmont Hills mansion, surrounded by hardened men who had come very close to making a decision that couldn't be walked back, Ryder Calloway took his hand off the Glock and put it on the keyboard and began to do something far harder than what his body had wanted to do. He began to build a case. But in the bottom drawer of Langford's desk, half visible under a manila folder, a burner phone with the screen still lit, a text thread open, 3 words sent 12 minutes ago to an unsaved number. They found me. And somewhere in the city below, a phone received that message, and the person reading it began to move. The burner phone sat on the edge of the desk, and nobody touched it. Ryder had seen it the same moment Torres had. The lit screen, the open thread, the 3 words sitting there like a grenade with the pin already pulled, and for exactly 4 seconds the room processed what it meant. Then Ryder picked it up with 2 fingers, careful about surfaces, and read the thread from the beginning. There wasn't much of it. 12 exchanges over 6 weeks, all from Langford's end, all brief, all in the clipped non-language of men who communicated like they expected to be read by someone they didn't want reading them. References to logistics without naming the logistics. References to timelines without naming the events. One exchange, 3 weeks back, that referenced a delivery in terms Ryder had seen used before, in a different context, a different city, a different kind of war, and that made the muscles in his forearms go rigid without any instruction from his brain. The last number that had messaged Langford, not the unsaved recipient of the "they found me" text, but a second contact listed only as a letter, a single D, had sent a message 40 minutes ago that read, "Confirmation on the weekend." Same location. 4. Ryder set the phone back down. "Copy it all," he said to Ghost, who was still on the line, who had heard everything in the room through the open connection and had gone very quiet in the way Ghost went quiet when he was absorbing information and converting it into action rather than language. "The phone, too. I'm going to photograph every screen." "Already walking you through it," Ghost said. "The computer first. Look in the bottom left of the taskbar for—" Ryder followed the instructions. He moved through the computer with Ghost's voice in his ear, methodical, room temperature, the same practiced patience he'd used to clear buildings in Ramadi. 1 room at a time, no assumption of safety, no skipped corners. Torres had positioned himself at the study door. Cabo was at the window. Priest hadn't moved from the back wall and was watching Langford with an expression Ryder had clocked once and then deliberately stopped looking at, because Priest was 25 and didn't have the years yet to keep something like this from showing on his face. Langford sat in his chair and didn't speak. He'd made one move, a small, probably unconscious shift of his right hand toward the desk drawer, the one that wasn't the burner phone drawer, and Dex had stepped forward from the wall and put one hand flat on the desk surface directly in front of him, not touching him, just occupying the space, and Langford had put his hand back in his lap and hadn't moved it again. It took 41 minutes. Ghost guided Ryder through a compressed transfer to an encrypted cloud partition, a secondary copy to a portable drive that Dex had in his jacket. They carried those the way other men carried pens, out of years of specific habit, and a full photographic record of the phone's message history, contacts, and call log. When it was done, Ryder stood back and looked at what they had. "Ghost," he said, "what we've got. Is it enough?" A pause. "For what?" "To put him away without us." Another pause. Longer. "The email metadata alone, combined with the files. If this gets to the right hands with the right framing, yeah. Probably, yeah. The phone content makes it stronger. Is there anything on the drive with victim identification?" Ryder thought about what he'd seen on the screen. The photographs, the names and the files. "Yes." "Then yes," Ghost said. "It's enough. The question is who you give it to and how, because if there's a wrong move here, the chain of custody evaporates and a lawyer gets him out before the ink dries." "I know. I've got a contact at the FBI field office. Not a friend. A professional relationship. She won't ask how the information was obtained if the information is solid. And this, Ghost paused again. This is solid, Ryder. Keep her warm, Ryder said. Don't call yet. He ended the connection. The room settled into the specific quality of silence that came after the operational part of something ended, and the weight of what had been uncovered was allowed, briefly, to be felt. Ryder looked at the drive in his hand. He looked at Langford in the chair. He looked at his brothers arranged around the room and read each of them the way he read rooms, quickly, accurately, knowing that what he was reading mattered because what happened in the next 60 seconds would depend on it. Dex was controlled. He had the tight-jawed, flat-eyed stillness of a man who had decided exactly what he wanted to do and was in the process of not doing it, which was the thing Dex was best at, and the thing that made him the most reliable man Ryder had ever known. Torres was angry in the clean, cold way Torres was always angry, without theater, without escalation, just a low-grade current that ran under everything he did and occasionally expressed itself as an economy of movement so precise it looked rehearsed. Cabo had his hands in his jacket pockets and was looking at the floor, which was Cabo's way of being someplace else for a minute before coming back, a habit from 3 tours and a particular kind of loss that had taken him 2 years after discharge to stop trying to drink into silence. And Priest was still against the back wall. His breathing had changed. Ryder could see it from across the room. The slight elevation, the way his chest moved, the tension in his jaw that he probably didn't know was visible. Priest had come to the club 18 months ago with a referral from a veterans outreach contact and a history that Ryder knew in outline and that Priest had never fully spoken aloud. The outline was enough. Ryder knew what that outline meant in a room like this one, in front of a man like the one sitting in the chair. Priest, Ryder said quietly. The younger man looked at him. Go wait by the south fence. A beat. Priest's eyes moved to Langford, then back to Ryder. I'm good, he said. I know you are. Go wait by the south fence. Priest looked at him for another second, and then something in his face settled, and he pushed off the wall and left the room. Ryder heard his footsteps cross the kitchen and the sound of the side door opening and closing. He looked back at Langford. The people you sent the 3 words to, Ryder said. Who are they? Langford's mouth was a thin line. The contact listed as D, Ryder said. The weekend. Same location. 4. He watched Langford's face. 4 what? Nothing. You understand that I have everything on that drive, Ryder said. You understand that the only open question right now is whether you spend the next phase of your life as the man who cooperated or the man who didn't. Langford's eyes moved to Dex. Back to Ryder. You're going to give this to the police. The FBI, Ryder said. Not the local precinct. I've already met local. Something shifted in Langford's face at the word FBI. A small, involuntary movement around the eyes, a tightening that communicated something Ryder filed and didn't comment on. There are people who will... He stopped. People who will what? Langford looked at his hands in his lap. If I give you names, those people will know. They have... He stopped again, restarted. This isn't just me. He couldn't finish the sentence, not because he was emotional, because he was calculating, even now, even here in his living room surrounded by men who'd come over his fence in the dark. He was calculating. There are 3 others, all of them with more insulation than I have. Names. If I give you names, I need something. Ryder looked at him. I need to know my son is... Langford stopped. I have a son. 22. He doesn't know anything about this. I need to know he's protected from... You don't get to ask me for anything, Ryder said. You tried to put my daughter in a car. The room stayed silent. Names, Ryder said again. Langford gave them 3 names. He gave them in the tone of a man emptying his pockets at gunpoint, not from conscience, not from remorse, from the pure mechanical logic of a man who understood that his leverage was gone and the only remaining variable was degree. 2 of the names meant nothing to Ryder. The third landed in the room like something dropped from a height, and he saw the same recognition move through Torres that moved through him, and neither of them commented on it, which was itself a conversation. They left 10 minutes later. They left Langford in his chair. They left the burner phone on the desk. Ghost had everything from it. And they left through the side door and went over the fence at the oak tree the same way they'd come in. Priest was waiting by the south fence line, his back to the wall, looking at the city lights below. And he fell in with them without a word. They walked to the vehicles in silence, moving through the cold dark of the hill road with the particular quality of men who were processing something too large for the walk back to contain. Torres drove. Ryder sat in the passenger seat and held the portable drive and looked out the window at the city and didn't speak for the first 15 minutes. "The third name," Torres said eventually. "Yeah." "You sure you heard that right?" "I heard it right." Torres drove. The heater was on but not working particularly well, and the cold pressed against the windows from outside in long gray pulses. Below them, as they descended from the hills, Oakland spread out in its nighttime geography. The lit grid of downtown, the darker patches of the industrial waterfront, the scattered amber of the residential neighborhoods, the black gap of the bay beyond everything. "That changes things," Torres said. "I know." "That means this goes higher than a commissioner." "I know that too." "So what are we—" "I need to think," Ryder said. "Drive." Torres drove. By the time they got back to the garage, it was past 2 in the morning. The bay was exactly as they'd left it, except that someone, Ryder suspected it had been Dex, sometime in the first 30 minutes after they'd gone, had made a fresh pot of coffee and left it on the burner, which was the kind of thing that only got noticed at 2 a.m. when the need for it intersected perfectly with its existence. Ryder poured a cup and stood at the workbench and drank it and didn't taste it. He checked on Lily first. She was still asleep on the office couch, hadn't moved, the blanket tucked up to her chin. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. The slow movement of her breathing, the absolute trust implicit in the way she slept, the vulnerability of it. And then he pulled the door softly to and came back to the bay. His brothers were distributed around the space in the loose, familiar way of men who spent a lot of time together in a contained area. Dex at the workbench with his coffee, Torres sitting on the fender of the unfinished Softail with his arms crossed, Cabo in a folding chair near the side wall, Priest leaning against the parts room door. Nobody was talking. The bay hummed with the white noise of the ventilation and the distant sound of traffic on the waterfront road. Ryder put his cup down and looked at them. "The third name Langford gave us is a problem," he said. "Which kind of problem?" Dex said. "The kind that means we can't go to the FBI field office tomorrow morning and hand them a drive and walk away." Dex's eyes moved. "Who is it?" Ryder said the name. The bay stayed quiet. "Say that again," Torres said from the fender of the Softail. Ryder said it again. "Special Agent Daniel Voss, FBI Organized Crime and Public Corruption, San Francisco Field Office." A name that Ryder knew because 3 years ago, during a federal investigation into Bay Area organized crime that had briefly and unpleasantly brushed the outer edge of Iron Veil's operations, Voss had been one of 2 agents who'd come to the garage with a subpoena and sat across the desk from Ryder for 2 hours asking questions that went nowhere. A name that Ryder knew because Voss had shaken his hand at the end of that meeting with a friendliness that had felt precisely calibrated and had stayed with Ryder in the specific way that things stayed with him when they didn't sit right. Ghost's contact at the FBI was in a different division. But divisions talked. Divisions shared intelligence. A name like Voss in a package sent to the San Francisco field office didn't stay in a folder. It moved, and the question of which direction it moved and who got to read it first was now a question Ryder didn't have a safe answer to. "Ghost's contact," Dex said. "She's in cybercrimes." "I know." "Different division." "I know that too. Doesn't mean Voss doesn't have eyes in her division." "You don't know that he does." "I don't know that he doesn't." Dex put his coffee cup down on the workbench. He looked at Ryder with the particular quality of attention he reserved for conversations where the stakes were above a certain threshold, fully present, stripped of everything extraneous, just the basic fact of his intelligence directed at a problem. "So what are you saying? That we sit on this?" "I'm saying we can't hand it over blind. And if we sit on it, the weekend comes, and 4, whatever 4 means, happens." "I know." "Ryder." Dex's voice was very even. "If 4 is what I think it is, I know what 4 is," Ryder said. The silence that followed was the specific kind that happened when everyone in a room understood the same thing at the same time, and the understanding was bad enough that saying it out loud would be its own kind of damage. 4 children. That was what the message meant. The same location, the weekend. 4 children delivered to someone on a Saturday somewhere in the Bay Area, and the clock between now and Saturday was a number that Ryder was doing the math on involuntarily and arriving at a figure that was not large enough. It was Wednesday night, 3 days. "We need more than we have," Ryder said. "The drive is evidence, but it's not enough to move on Voss. If we hand it over and Voss gets to it first, everything on that drive disappears. And Langford has an accident, and we spend the next 2 years under surveillance waiting for the retaliation. We need something that puts Voss in the package himself, something specific." "How do we get that in 3 days?" Torres said. "Ghost starts tonight. He's already working the metadata. If Voss has been in communication with any of the addresses on that phone, Torres said. If, but Langford named him for a reason. He named him the same way he named the other 2, as part of the structure. That means there's a connection. And if there's a connection, there's a trace." Torres pushed off the soft-tail fender and stood. He was a man who thought better on his feet. He walked the length of the bay slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, and turned at the end and came back. "And while Ghost is pulling threads, what are we doing?" "We find the location," Ryder said. "The same location from the message. It's been used before. That's what same means. It's a recurring site. Ghost can cross-reference the timeline of the messages against property records, event records, anything that puts Langford or his network in a physical space on a regular basis." He stopped. "And we find out what happened to the 14 missing kids from Fremont." The bay went very quiet. "That's a federal investigation," Cabo said from the folding chair. It was the first time he'd spoken since they'd come through the fence. His voice was level, deliberately so. "Yeah. We're not equipped for—" "I'm not asking us to run a federal investigation," Ryder said. "I'm asking us to find one address, one location, before Saturday." Cabo looked at him. He was a man who chose words carefully because he'd learned through experience that the wrong word in the wrong moment cost more than silence. What he was deciding right now, Ryder could see, wasn't whether to argue. It was whether what he wanted to say was the right word or the wrong one. "Okay," Cabo said. Ryder looked at Priest. Priest had been standing at the parts room door since they'd come back, and he hadn't said anything. And the silence around him had a quality Ryder had been tracking for the last 10 minutes without making it visible. "You good?" Ryder asked. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Priest looked at the floor, then up. "I've been in a room with a man like that before," he said. Not exactly like that, but close enough." A pause. "I'm fine." Ryder held the eye contact for a moment. "Okay." "I want to help find the location," Priest said. "Whatever Ghost needs. I'll tell him." He called Ghost at 2:15 a.m., and Ghost, who apparently didn't sleep the way other men slept, answered on the first ring with the sound of multiple keyboards in the background and Hendrix making a sound that suggested the cat's food situation needed attention. "Voss," Ryder said. "A beat. What about him?" "He's the third name Langford gave us." The keyboard sound stopped. "Langford gave you Daniel Voss." "Yeah. That's—" Ghost made a sound that wasn't a word. "That's a significant problem." "I know." "Your contact at Cyber." "I know. Can you work around it?" "Maybe. I need to think about the routing. If I go through her and Voss has any kind of informal informant relationship in her division, that's the question." "Give me until morning," Ghost said. "I'm also going to start on the location. The same location reference, combined with the timeline of communications and the property connection in Fremont. There are a limited number of sites that fit the use pattern. I'll start with a radius around the Fremont address and work out." A pause. "Ryder?" "Yeah." "The timeline on the weekend. If I can't nail the location before—" "Find the location," Ryder said, "before the weekend." He hung up. It was close to 3 a.m. The bay lights hummed. Outside, the cold had deepened. He could hear it in the particular quality of the silence beyond the walls, the way sound traveled differently in near-freezing air, the distant traffic sounds arriving too clearly, as if the cold were a conductor. Somewhere in the industrial district, a shipping container was being moved, the deep mechanical groan of a crane audible even at this distance. Torres had fallen asleep in the folding chair against the east wall, his chin on his chest, arms crossed, with the practiced ability of a man who'd learned to take rest wherever it was available, regardless of conditions. Cabo was still awake, sitting on an overturned crate near the parts room, looking at his phone, though Ryder suspected he wasn't reading anything on it. Dex was at the workbench, had pulled the Softail's carburetor apart for no particular mechanical reason. It was what Dex did when he needed to think without appearing to think. Priest was outside. Ryder had heard the side door open and close 40 minutes ago and hadn't heard it open again. He went to the door now and pushed it open. The alley behind the garage was narrow and dark, lit only by the amber overflow from the street at the far end. Priest was sitting on an overturned milk crate against the wall, jacket collar up, both hands wrapped around a thermos cup that steamed in the cold air. He looked up when the door opened and didn't seem surprised to see Ryder. Ryder came out and let the door close behind him and leaned against the wall next to the milk crate and tilted his head back against the corrugated steel siding and looked up at the sky, which was low and orange with cloud cover and city light and had no stars visible in it. For a while, neither of them said anything. The cold settled over them both, the particular damp cold of the Bay Area waterfront at 3 a.m., the kind that got into the seams of your jacket and the gap between your collar and your neck. Somewhere on the bay a horn sounded, a long, low navigational signal from something large and slow moving through the dark water. "You don't have to tell me," Ryder said. Priest turned the thermos cup slowly in his hands. "My sister," he said. "She was 12. He paused. Different context, different city, same... He stopped. Ryder didn't say anything. "She got out," Priest said. "She's okay. She's in Portland now. She's..." A breath. "But she didn't get out because the system worked. She got out because a neighbor made enough noise that it became easier to let her go than to keep her. That was the whole calculation. Easier." His jaw tightened. She was 12, and she was somebody's calculation. The horn on the bay sounded again, closer. "That's why you're here," Ryder said. It wasn't a question. Part of it. Priest looked at the orange sky. Felt like, the club is the first place I've been where I understood the math, where the calculation about who matters and who doesn't runs the right direction. Ryder let that sit. "We'll find the location," he said after a while. "I know we will." Priest said it with a certainty that was not bravado. It was something quieter and older. "That's not what I'm worried about." "What are you worried about?" Priest looked at him. In the amber dark of the alley, his face was all edges and shadow, 25 years old and carrying something considerably older. "I'm worried about what happens when we find it, and it's too late." Ryder looked at the orange sky. "Then we make sure we find it first," he said. He went back inside. He worked until 5 a.m. with Ghost on the phone, going through property records and event permits and satellite imagery, pulling threads that mostly didn't lead anywhere, and a few that led somewhere worth remembering. Ghost had identified 3 candidate locations in a radius around the Fremont address: a decommissioned light industrial facility in Hayward, a marina storage complex in Alameda, and a private property registered to a family trust in San Leandro that had no registered occupant but had received 3 utility reconnections in the past 18 months, each one shortly before a gap in Langford's communications pattern. The San Leandro property was the strongest thread. Ghost was pulling it. At 5:15, Ryder's phone buzzed with a text from an unsaved number. Not Ghost's line, not any of his brothers. A number he didn't recognize, Bay Area prefix, and a message of 11 words that he read once and then read again, and then sat very still with his phone in his hand for a long time. "Your daughter is safer when you stop. Think about what you're risking." He looked up from the phone. The bay was still quiet. Torres was asleep. Dex was at the workbench. The ventilation hummed. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. Someone knew where they'd been tonight. Not Langford. Langford was presumably still in his chair in Piedmont, doing whatever calculations a man in that situation did in the hours before the world came apart around him. Someone else. Someone in the network who'd received the "they found me" text, who'd had 6 hours to process it, who'd identified Ryder specifically, who knew not just his name but his daughter's existence, and had chosen to reach him through it. Ryder looked at the office door, closed, his daughter sleeping on the other side of it. He went to the windows. He went to each one in sequence, looking out at the alley, the side street, the front parking area, methodically, not quickly. Nothing visible. But visible and safe were two different measures, and he knew the difference. He woke Dex with a hand on his shoulder. Dex was awake instantly, fully, in the way of men whose sleep had been trained into a particular shallowness by years of circumstances that didn't allow for depth. Ryder showed him the message. Dex read it. His jaw tightened. He looked at Ryder. "Somebody's watching us," Ryder said. "For how long?" "Long enough." Dex stood up from the bench. "We need to move her." "Yeah." "Somewhere they don't have an address for." Ryder was already thinking. There was a place, not a club property, not a location connected to his name or his brother's names. A house in the Diamond District that belonged to a woman named Patrice Sullivan, who was 63 and formidable, and who had been doing the club's books for 11 years, and who was the only person outside the membership that Ryder trusted with something that mattered this much. He'd call her at 5:30. She would answer. She would not ask unnecessary questions. But the text meant something else too, something he needed to say out loud to himself before it became a decision he wasn't aware of making. Whoever sent it knew about Lily, knew about tonight, knew enough to make the threat specific, which meant the network was closer than Langford's files had suggested, which meant the 3 days before the weekend had just gotten shorter. His phone buzzed again. Same unsaved number. "We know about Ghost too, and the drive. You have until midnight Friday to make it disappear." And then, 4 seconds later, a third message. Just an image. A photograph, taken from a distance with a long lens, grainy in the pre-dawn dark. The garage exterior. The alley. 2 figures visible. He recognized the jacket, the posture. Himself and Priest. 40 minutes ago. Standing in the alley in the dark, a conversation they'd believed was private. Ryder stared at the photograph on his screen. They hadn't been followed to Langford's house. The surveillance was here, had been here, outside the garage, while his daughter slept inside, while his brothers worked, while all of them believed that the danger was 14 miles away in a Piedmont study and not in the alley behind their own building. He looked at Dex. Dex had read the messages over his shoulder. His face was a controlled surface over something that wasn't controlled at all. "Wake everyone up," Ryder said. His voice was very quiet. "And then I need someone to go outside and find the camera." Because there was a camera somewhere in the dark outside these walls. And the person on the other end of it was not Victor Langford, who'd been a predator with resources but not with this kind of operational sophistication. This was something else. The third name Langford had given was Voss, but there were 2 others. 2 names Ryder hadn't recognized. He was beginning to think he needed to recognize them faster. Dex moved to wake Torres. Ryder stood at the window and looked out at the pre-dawn dark of the industrial waterfront, at the street where nothing moved, at the space between the buildings where anything could stand and watch and be invisible. And he felt the shape of the thing they'd walked into solidify around him. Not like a trap, not yet, but like the early edges of one, the way you could sometimes feel the architecture of an ambush before you could see it, a quality of the silence that was wrong in some direction you couldn't name. His daughter was asleep 10 feet behind him, and someone with a camera and a midnight deadline was somewhere out there in the dark. And Ghost had just sent a message on the encrypted channel that said 4 words, San Leandro. It's active. Ghost's 4 words sat on the encrypted channel like a lit fuse. San Leandro. It's active. Ryder read them twice, and then put the phone face down on the workbench and looked at the wall for 3 seconds, which was the amount of time he allowed himself before the information stopped being something that happened to him and started being something he was going to do something about. 3 seconds was a habit from the core, long enough to absorb, short enough to not let it root. San Leandro property is active, he said to the room. Dex had Torres awake. Torres was standing now, jacket on, eyes fully open in the flat, immediate way of a man who didn't transition gradually between sleep and readiness. Cabo had come off the crate. Priest was back inside, had come in through the side door 2 minutes ago with his collar dark from the early morning damp, and he stood near the parts room and listened. "Active how?" Torres said. Ryder picked the phone back up and called Ghost directly. Ghost answered before the first ring finished. In the background, the keyboards had a different quality now. Faster, more compressed. The sound of someone who'd found the thread and was pulling it hard. "Tell me," Ryder said. "Utility account on the San Leandro property has a power draw that started 6 hours ago," Ghost said. "I pulled the smart meter data. Don't ask how. The draw pattern is consistent with climate control, interior lighting, and something with a higher load. Refrigeration, maybe, or supplemental heating. The property's been dormant for 11 weeks. It came on at 11:40 p.m. Ghost paused. 40 minutes after Langford sent the 3 words. He warned them. The text went to 2 numbers. We have one of them, the unsaved contact. The second one hasn't pinged since, but the timing matches. The property, what's on it? Single-story commercial building, former light manufacturing, converted partially. Permits were pulled for interior renovation 3 years ago, but the final inspection was never filed, which means the interior could be anything. Another pause. It's registered to a trust, Hargrove Family Trust. Beneficiary listed is a Margaret Hargrove, 71, resides in Scottsdale. She has no criminal record, no Bay Area connections that I can find, and almost certainly has no idea this property exists under her name. Shell was, Ryder said. Deep shell, 3 layers in. Whoever set it up knew what they were doing. Can you tie the trust back to any of the 3 names? Working on it. The Voss connection is harder. He's careful. He doesn't leave the same kind of trail. The other 2 names Langford gave you. A brief pause. One of them, Carver, has a law firm. The firm has done incorporation work for 11 trusts in the past 4 years. I'm cross-referencing now. If Hargrove Family Trust is in there, we have the connection. How long? 20 minutes, maybe 30. You've got 15, Ryder said. And Ghost, someone put a camera on our building. Find it on satellite if you can. I need to know how long it's been there. Silence on the line. Then, someone's watching the garage? They photographed me and Priest in the alley 40 minutes ago. Sent it to my phone. The silence that followed was the particular kind that Ghost produced when he was recalibrating. A brief, total stillness before the processing resumed. I'll find it, he said, and the line went quiet except for the keyboards. Ryder looked at his brothers. We need the camera located before we move anyone, Tits, he said. If they're watching the building, they're watching who leaves and in what direction. He looked at Torres. I need Lily out of here without them seeing it happen. Torres nodded. There's the loading tunnel under the East Bay. Hasn't been used in years, but it connects to the maintenance corridor under the warehouse next door. That building has a rear exit onto 4th Street. You've used it before. Once? For a different kind of problem. Does it still clear? One way to find out. Go find out, Ryder said, quietly. Torres went. Ryder went to the office and opened the door slowly so it didn't creak. Lily was still asleep. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her. 7 years old, one hand under her cheek, her school backpack on the floor next to the couch, with the book spilling out of the half-open zipper. He thought about what it would take to explain to her that they needed to move. She was smart enough to understand that something was wrong and young enough that the understanding would not have the filters an adult's would. It would go straight in. He needed to move her without the full weight of it landing on her at 5:30 a.m. He crossed to the couch and touched her shoulder. She came awake the way she always did, quickly, alert, her eyes finding his before anything else. It was something that both reassured him and broke something in him every time, the fact that she'd learned that particular wakefulness. A child her age should surface from sleep slowly, confused, soft at the edges. She came up clear and looking for him first, which told him something about the atmosphere she'd absorbed from her life that he spent a lot of quiet hours trying not to think about too directly. Hey, he said, we're going to move. Where? Patrice's house. She knew Patrice. Patrice was the woman who kept butterscotch candies in a glass dish on her kitchen counter and had a gray cat named Walter and called Lily baby girl in a tone that communicated genuine investment. Lily's expression shifted fractionally toward something less taut. Is it bad? It's careful, Ryder said. There's a difference. She looked at him with her mother's eyes and accepted that with the same quality of assessed trust she'd offered him at the beginning of the night, and she started collecting her things. Torres came back 10 minutes later. The tunnel was clear. Low ceiling, dust, a section where a support had shifted and required a lateral step, but passable. He'd propped the far end open. Ryder had called Patrice at 5:25, and Patrice had said nothing for 2 seconds, and then said she'd have the kettle on, which was all that needed to be said. Cabo took Lily through the tunnel. Lily went without a scene, backpack on both shoulders properly this time, because when things were actually dangerous, she had a way of becoming very compact and deliberate that Ryder recognized as something she'd developed specifically because she understood that his ability to function in a crisis depended in part on not being divided about her safety. She was 7 years old, and she was protecting him. He watched her go through the office floor panel and felt the weight of that sit on him in the particular way it always sat. Not guilt exactly, something that didn't have a cleaner name. Then he went back to the workbench and Ghost came back on the line. Cameras on the roof of the parking structure across harbor, Ghost said. Small, remote, directional. It's been up for 9 days. A pause. 9 days, Ryder. 9 days. Not triggered by last night. Not a reactive measure after Langford sent his warning. This had been in place for 9 days, which meant someone had been watching the garage for 9 days, and the question of what they'd seen in 9 days sat in the room like smoke. Is it live monitored or recording? Ryder asked. Live monitored. There's a data uplink. It's streaming to a remote address. Whoever put it up is watching in real time. Can you kill it? I can disrupt the uplink. Looks like a signal dropout. It'll give you a window before they investigate the hardware. Do it in 20 minutes, Ryder said. Not yet. I need them watching for the next 20 minutes while we stay still. Because the last thing he needed was for whoever was on the other end of that camera to see the garage go suddenly dark and scramble. He needed to control the moment the window opened, not hand it to them. Ghost called back in 11 minutes, not 20. Ryder. His voice had changed quality. The operational efficiency was still there, but something had come into it. A compression, like a man trying to keep something contained by making himself very precise. I found the Carver connection to the Hargrove Trust. Good. That's not... Ghost stopped, restarted. There's a second document in the incorporation records, a co-trustee filing from 2 years ago. The co-trustee added to the Hargrove Trust 2 years ago is... A breath. It's Mason Rowe. The name took a moment, then it arrived. Mason Rowe had been Iron Vale's sergeant-at-arms for 4 years before he'd left the club. Ryder had voted him out personally 18 months ago on a conduct violation that Rowe had never accepted as legitimate, and that had ended with Rowe walking out of the clubhouse and taking his cutoff in the parking lot and leaving it on the asphalt. He'd left Oakland 2 weeks later. Ryder had heard he was in Sacramento, then Reno, then nothing. He'd stopped tracking it because a man who left the way Rowe left, angry, certain of his own righteousness, burning the exit, was a problem that aged out if you didn't feed it. Apparently it hadn't aged out. Apparently it had been building. Mason Rowe is a co-trustee on the San Leandro Shell property, Ryder said. Signed 2 years ago, Ghost said. Which means he was still in the club when he did it. The bay went completely silent. The implication arrived in layers, and Ryder let it arrive without trying to manage the sequence, because the sequence mattered. Rowe had been sergeant-at-arms, the man responsible for club security, for knowing who came through the doors, and who had access to what and where the bodies were buried, figuratively, and in several cases less figuratively. He'd been inside the structure for 4 years. He knew the properties, the routes, the contacts. He knew about Ghost. He knew about Patrice. He knew about Lily's school and Lily's route and Ryder's daily patterns in a way that the last 9 days of camera footage only supplemented. He hadn't been surveilling them for 9 days. He'd been surveilling them for 4 years. Torres, Ryder said. Torres was already looking at him with the expression of a man who'd heard enough of one side of the phone call to have built the shape of the other side. Rowe. Yeah. Torres said a word that was short and specific and extremely accurate to the situation. He would have known about the camera placement, Ryder said. He helped design our counter-surveillance protocols. He knew every blind spot on the building. He stopped. He knew about the loading tunnel. The room processed that. Cabo had taken Lily through the loading tunnel 40 minutes ago. Cabo had taken Lily to the maintenance corridor and out onto 4th Street and from there to Patrice's car, which was meeting them 2 blocks over. A route that Ryder had considered safe because it was below the camera's sightline. But if Rowe had built a second coverage point, a ground-level position, something small and mobile, the loading tunnel wasn't below anything. It was just a different angle. Ryder called Cabo. Cabo answered on the 3rd ring. "We're at Patrice's. Lily's inside." "You were followed?" A pause. Longer than it should have been. "I don't think so. I ran the counter route, changed direction twice on 4th, came up through the residential on Maple." Another pause. "I don't think so. But you're not certain." "I was careful, Ryder." "That's not what I asked." The silence on the line was Cabo being honest with himself. "No," he said finally. "I'm not certain." Ryder ended the call. He looked at Dex. Dex was looking back at him with both hands flat on the workbench, leaning slightly forward, and his face had the quality it got when he'd absorbed something and was waiting for the direction it required. "If they know where Lily is," Ryder said, and stopped. "They won't move on her yet," Dex said. "The text said midnight Friday. They want the drive first. They want Ghost. As long as they think they have leverage, they'll let her sit." A pause. "But we can't leave her there." "I can't move her again without knowing where Rowe is. Then we find Rowe." "Ghost," Ryder said into the phone. "Mason Rowe, current location, everything." "Working," Ghost said. He'd been on the line continuously, had heard all of it, and the keyboards in the background had already been running. "He has a vehicle registered in Oakland, changed back from Reno 6 weeks ago. Address is a monthly rental in Fruitvale. I'm pulling utility activity now to see if he's actually been there." "He came back 6 weeks ago," Ryder said. "Yeah." 3 weeks before the camera went up? "Yeah." Ryder thought about the 9 days of camera footage. He thought about what those 9 days had captured. His brothers' faces, vehicles, schedules, the number of men in the building at any given hour, who came and went, who Ryder called, and when. He thought about the operational sophistication of the text messages, the photograph taken in the dark. He thought about a man who'd spent 4 years inside Iron Vale's security structure learning its architecture, then spent the following 18 months building something with that knowledge. "He's not working alone," Ryder said. "Rowe connects the club's operational history to Langford's network. That's what he sold them. That's the commodity. Access. He knew us well enough to be useful, and they were useful enough to him that he traded it. A man who felt wronged looking for a structure to aim it through," Dex said. "Yeah." "We voted him out over the Kelso thing," Torres said from the wall. The Kelso thing. A civilian who'd come to the garage with a grievance about a repair bill and left with 2 broken ribs after Rowe had decided the man's tone warranted a response that the club had not authorized. Ryder had called the vote the same night. Rowe had been certain, on the way out, that the vote was about something else, that Ryder had been looking for an excuse, that the broken ribs were the cover story for a power play, that some personal accounting was being settled. He'd been wrong about all of it, and hadn't believed that for a second. An angry man with a story he told himself long enough to believe it was the truth was the most dangerous kind of enemy, not because of what he'd do, because of what he'd justify. Ghost came back on. "The Fruitvale address has active utility use. He's been there. I've also got a ping from the vehicle registration. There's a toll record from 2 days ago putting his truck on the San Mateo Bridge, eastbound, at 7 p.m. A pause. "Coming from the direction of San Leandro." "He's been to the property," Ryder said. "In the last 48 hours. "Yeah." The rain started outside. It arrived without much warning. A rapid shift from the pre-dawn cold to something wetter, the sound of it hitting the garage roof in a low, continuous percussion that filled the bay from above. Through the high windows, the orange pre-dawn glow shifted to something darker and grayer. The ventilation system adjusted its sound slightly, the way it always did in rain. Ryder looked at the clock on the wall. 6:12 a.m. Slightly more than 2 days to midnight Friday. The San Leandro property was active. Roe was in the city. The camera across the street was still streaming to a remote address. Lily was at Patrice's house with a possibly compromised route. He needed to move in 3 directions simultaneously, and he had 5 men. "Here's what happens," he said, and the room gathered itself. "Dex and Priest go to Fruitvale. Roe's address. I want eyes on whether he's there, and I want to know who else comes or goes. Do not make contact. Do not let him see you. Observation only." He looked at Dex. Dex nodded. "Torres, you're with me. We go to San Leandro. Ghost is going to kill the camera uplink in..." He looked at his phone. 12 minutes. That gives us a window to leave the building before they realize coverage is down and send someone to check hardware. We use that window. He stopped. "And someone needs to go to Patrice's and stay there. Physical presence, not a call." "I'll call Hendricks," Dex said. Hendricks was a club associate. Not a patch, a trusted peripheral, a man who'd done 2 years working with Iron Veil's towing operation and who had a particular talent for being still and patient in enclosed spaces for long periods of time. "He can be at Patrice's in 20. Make the call." They were moving in 9 minutes, which was 6 minutes before Ghost killed the uplink, which meant they were leaving while the camera was still active. But leaving through the side alley rather than the front, out of the camera's sightline, which was the only advantage they had. The rain was helping. Rain diffused ground observation and made vehicle ID harder, and right now Ryder was grateful for every variable that complicated someone else's picture. Torres drove. Ryder sat in the passenger seat of Torres's truck and held his phone and watched the city come up around them through the rain-streaked window. The pre-dawn streets of Oakland empty and wet and orange-lit, a garbage truck working its route on International, a man walking a dog under an umbrella on a corner. The ordinary world, completely unaware. Ghost confirmed the camera uplink drop at 6:24, 4 minutes after they'd left the building. The San Leandro address was a 20-minute drive south on the 880. They came off the freeway into an industrial area that was the particular kind of flat and gray that industrial areas become when it's raining before dawn. Everything surface level, no depth. The buildings just shapes in the wet dark. Ghost had sent coordinates and a satellite image marked with the property boundary. Ryder navigated them to a street that ran parallel to the target address and had them park between 2 panel vans that provided reasonable cover. They sat in the truck and looked at the property from 200 yards. Single-story building, concrete block construction, no visible windows on the street-facing side. A loading bay door on the east end closed. Exterior lighting. 2 sodium floods above the entrance that threw yellow circles on the wet asphalt. No vehicles visible in the lot, but the lot had a second access point on the far end that couldn't be seen from their position. "Walk me around," Ryder said quietly. "There's a drainage easement on the south side," Ghost said on the line. "It runs behind the property and gives you a sight line to the rear. The chain link back there is old. County records show it as a boundary marker, not security." They went on foot. The rain was steady, not heavy, the kind that soaked through clothing gradually and without drama. They went along the drainage easement, moving parallel to the building's south wall, and came around to a position behind the property where the old chain link ran along the rear boundary. Through the fence, through the rain, a rear parking area. 2 vehicles, a dark panel van with no markings and a black pickup truck that Torres put a hand on Ryder's arm over. The same make and model, Ryder confirmed when he looked, as the vehicle in Ghost's toll record. Roe's truck. "He's here," Torres said very quietly. "Yeah." There was a ground-level window on the rear wall, high-placed, set with wire-reinforced glass of the kind that industrial buildings used for minimal natural light. A faint warm glow came from it. Interior lighting, at 6:40 a.m., rain coming down, which meant people inside who were either there through the night or who had arrived very recently. Ryder looked at Torres. Torres looked back at him. "We agreed observation," Torres said. He said it as a statement, not a warning. He was giving Ryder the information. "Yeah," Ryder said. He looked at the building for 30 seconds. He looked at Roe's truck in the rain. He thought about Ghost's message. San Leandro. It's active. He thought about the timeline. Less than 48 hours to midnight Friday. He thought about the message that said 4 and the message that said same location and the property that had come online 6 hours ago, which meant whatever was being prepared inside that building had a significant head start on any response he could mount. He thought about his sister, which was Priest's voice from the alley, and the calculation, and the word easier. "We need to know what's inside," he said. Torres didn't argue. He looked at the building and nodded once, and they went over the chain link. They came in low along the rear wall, under the sodium flood's coverage angle, and reached the ground-level window without triggering anything they could detect. Ryder looked through the wire-reinforced glass at an angle that gave him a partial interior view, a large open space. Concrete floor. Industrial shelving along the far wall, cleared. Portable lighting units set up on stands, and in the center of the space, a structure that had been assembled recently. Partitioned rooms, temporary walls, the kind of constructed interior that could be broken down and removed in hours and would leave nothing behind except anchor points in the concrete. The rooms had doors. The doors had padlocks. There were 2 men visible, not row, different builds, moving through the space with the purposeful economy of men finishing a setup job. One of them was carrying what looked like a folded blanket. The other had a box, cardboard, the kind things were packed into for transport. Ryder counted the partitioned rooms. 4. He looked at Torres. Torres had seen it. Torres's jaw was a rigid line, and his eyes were doing something that was not emotion in any clean sense of the word, but was the particular compound thing that happened when a man who'd controlled himself through very difficult situations arrived at the edge of what control was built to contain. "Ghost," Ryder said into the phone, barely above a breath. "The Carver connection. Can you tie the timeline of the trust activity to a specific transport pattern? Specifically, has there been a prior use of this property that matches a missing person's report date?" Ghost was already running. He'd heard the window, the description. Cross-referencing now. There's a report cluster. 5 reports within a 6-week window, 18 months ago. 3 of the 5 were in cities within a 40-mile radius of San Leandro. A pause. One of the reports lists a witness description of a dark panel van. The same dark panel van currently parked in the lot behind the building. Ryder pressed his back against the wall and breathed through his nose slowly and looked at the pre-dawn sky above the building. The orange-gray of rain and city light, a plane's navigation blink passing distant and indifferent through the clouds. And he felt the thing he'd felt in the office the night before arrive again, but larger now, and with a specificity it hadn't had then. He wasn't standing at the edge anymore. "We need to call Ghost's FBI contact," Torres said, voice like flat concrete. "Right now." "Voss?" "I know about Voss. We route around Voss. Ghost finds a way to get this to someone in the San Francisco office who isn't Voss, and we make the call right now, tonight, with the property active and the vehicles here and the evidence on the drive and 2 confirmed witnesses who can put people inside the building." Torres's voice hadn't risen. That was the most dangerous thing about it. "We do it right, and we do it now, or we do something else and we can't undo it." Ryder looked at the window, at the partial view of the temporary walls and the padlocked doors and the portable lighting and the 2 men moving through the space with their blankets and boxes and their operational efficiency. If there's a leak between Ghost Contact and Voss, if there is, we deal with that. But if we sit here until we're certain, Friday comes. Torres turned his head and looked at Ryder directly. "Ryder, Friday comes." Ryder looked at his phone. Ghost was on the line, listening, had been listening to all of it. "Ghost," Ryder said, "your FBI contact, how certain are you?" "Of her, certain," Ghost said. "Of her division being clean of Voss's reach, less certain. But I can frame the delivery in a way that I can trigger a mandatory field response that bypasses the normal chain. An anonymous tip to the national hotline with specific location and timeline data generates an automatic field office response within 8 hours. The field office response team gets assigned by duty roster, not by case ownership. Voss doesn't get flagged unless he's actively monitoring the tip line, which would require him to already know we have him. Does he know we have him? Langford knows you have the files. Whether he gave Voss his own name in the context of what you asked him, You were there. Ryder thought about Langford in the chair, the rapid eye movement, the calculation. Langford had named Voss as part of the network structure, not because he was cooperating, but because he was building a play. A man like Langford, when cornered, gave you information that served his interests by appearing to serve yours. If he'd named Voss specifically, it was possible he'd also warned Voss. It was possible the two phone numbers the warning text went to included one that led directly back to a federal agent's burner. It was possible they'd handed Voss his own name as a warning. If we call it in and Voss shuts it down, Ryder started. He can't shut down a federal tip line response in 8 hours, Ghost said. He'd have to know it was coming before it was filed. If we file it right now, the window is too short. Torres was looking at him. The rain fell. Inside the building, behind the wire-reinforced glass, the two men moved through the space and the temporary walls stood, and the padlocked doors waited, and the portable lights hummed their warm yellow hum. Ryder's phone buzzed. New message. Same unsaved number as the midnight threats. He looked at the screen. One photograph, taken recently. The timestamp read 18 minutes ago. The image showed the exterior of a house in the Diamond District, a gray cat visible in a front window, the number on the porch, Patrice's address, and below the photo, 4 words. Clock starts right now. Ryder stared at the message and felt the architecture of the trap complete itself around him with the specific, terrible clarity of a man who had just understood that every move he'd made in the last 12 hours had been anticipated, absorbed, and converted into pressure. The garage, the tunnel, Patrice's house. They had all of it. They'd had it before he started moving. He looked up from the phone at Torres. Torres read his face. "Lily," Torres said. "Yeah." And somewhere behind them, on the street they'd come in on, a vehicle turned slowly onto the block with its headlights off. The vehicle came in slow, with its headlights off, and that was the tell. Nobody drove a residential street at 6:50 a.m. in the rain with their lights off unless they were trying to arrive without being arrived at. And Ryder had the phone in his jacket, and Torres by the sleeve, and they were moving along the rear wall before the vehicle fully cleared the corner. Not running. Running was sound, and sound was information given to the wrong people. They moved low and fast along the building's south face, back through the drainage easement, back to the parallel street, and Torres's truck, and they were inside with the doors closed and the engine off when the headlights off vehicle, a dark SUV, late model, no plates visible in the rain and the dark, pulled into the lot behind the San Leandro property and stopped next to the panel van. 2 men got out. Then a third from the rear seat. The third man Ryder recognized by his walk before he recognized anything else about him. The specific forward lean, the way the left shoulder dropped slightly with each stride. A compensation pattern from an old shoulder separation that had never fully corrected. He'd watched that walk cross the garage floor for 4 years. Mason Rowe. Torres had seen it too. His hand was on the ignition key and not turning it, which was the right call. Engine sound in the pre-dawn quiet would carry, and his knuckles were pale on the key, and his jaw was doing the thing it did. "Ghost," Ryder said into the phone. "File the tip. Right now. Everything. The drive contents, the San Leandro address, the vehicle descriptions, the timeline. File it and make it specific enough that they can't sit on it." "Filing," Ghost said. No pause. No confirmation request. Just the word, and then the sound of keys. How long until a field team responds? Mandatory protocol on a tip with a specific address and active use evidence is 4 to 6 hours for initial contact, 8 for a full response team. But if I flag the child safety language correctly, it bumps to priority. Flag it. Flagging. Ryder. A brief stop. Hendricks is at Patrice's house. He's inside. But the photo they sent you, I know. If they move on that address before the FBI response, I know. He looked at Torres. Drive. Not toward the freeway. East through the industrial. Torres turned the key, and the truck came to life, and they pulled away from the curb slowly, lights on because lights off was the tell, and moved east through the gray, rain-soaked industrial streets, while behind them, Mason Rowe walked into a building that Ryder was now leaving in the hands of a federal response timeline and Ghost's correctly flagged language, and the specific hope that 4 to 6 hours was a number that held. His phone rang. Dex. He's not at the Fruitvale address, Dex said. Building's empty. Neighbor says he left last night with a bag. Didn't come back. He's in San Leandro. We just made him. A beat. You need us there. I need you at Patrice's right now. Both of you. Park down the block and do not announce yourself. On the way. He ended the call and looked at his phone and at the photograph of Patrice's house still open on the screen. The gray cat in the window, the porch number, the specific and deliberate message of it. And he felt the arithmetic of the situation arrange itself in the cold morning air of the truck cab with a clarity that was almost physical. Lily was at that house. Hendricks was inside. Dex and Priest were 20 minutes out. The FBI tip was filed. Rowe was at the San Leandro property with 2 other men and whatever was being assembled inside those temporary walls. And someone had sent that photograph 18 minutes ago, which meant someone had been at Patrice's house 18 minutes ago, close enough to frame the shot. He called Hendricks. Hendricks answered on the first ring. I see it, Hendricks said before Ryder could speak. Low voice, very controlled. Dark car been sitting on the cross street for the last 20 minutes. Didn't move when the rain picked up. Lily. Asleep upstairs. Patrice is in the kitchen. I'm in the front room. Dex and Priest are coming. You hold until they get there. Ryder's voice was flat. Nobody comes through that door. Copy, Hendricks said. Muicatorium. And he meant it in the specific way of a man who'd been asked to do something he was fully prepared to do. Ryder ended the call. Torres was driving and not speaking, which was Torres understanding that the next words needed to come from Ryder, and that filling the space before they came would cost something. The truck moved through the industrial east, rain on the windshield, the wipers working their steady count, the heater pushing warm air that neither of them was registering as warmth. Rowe knows we were at the building, Ryder said. If he drove in right after we left. He didn't drive in after we left. He drove in on schedule. The timing was his. Ryder looked at the water on the windshield. He knew we'd find the property. He's been feeding us the trail, Torres. The camera, the texts, the photo of Patrice's house. It's not containment. It's hurting. Torres's hands adjusted on the wheel. Hurting us where? Away from the building. Ryder looked at him. We found the building and he moved us away from it. The tip is filed, but the tip takes 4 hours minimum. Between now and the FBI response, that building is operational, and we are 20 minutes away focused on Lily. He stopped. That's the play. He knows I'll choose Lily. Wouldn't you? Every time. Ryder looked at the rain. Which is exactly why he built the threat toward her. He knows me well enough to know I can't hold position at the building when my daughter is in a car's crosshairs. His voice was very quiet. He learned that from 4 years of watching how I run. The truck stopped at a red light. The intersection was empty. Rain on the asphalt reflected the light in long red pools. Ryder looked at the red and felt something moving through him that was below anger and below fear and below the operational calculation, something that had no clean name except the one a man arrives at when he understands that the people who know him best are also the people most capable of using what they know. He'd voted Rowe out because of the Kelso thing, because it was right, because a man who used his size against a civilian over a bill wasn't a man who understood what the cut meant. He'd done it without anger, without ego, without the personal accounting Rowe had decided to read into it, and Rowe had spent 18 months building a weapon out of everything he knew. We split, Ryder said. You take the truck to Patrice's, you back up Dex and Hendricks, and you hold that position, and you keep Lily exactly where she is until the FBI response window closes or the threat moves. Either way, you call me the second anything changes. Torres looked at him. And you? I'm going back to San Leandro. On foot. Ghost. Ryder raised the phone. I need a vehicle near my current position. Anything. Registered clean. There's a club associate 2 miles east of you, Ghost said. Vargas? He's awake. I can call ahead. Call ahead. Torres pulled the truck over. He looked at Ryder in the gray morning light of the cab, the rain coming down outside, and his face did a specific thing it rarely did. It showed something that wasn't tactical. You go back there alone. I'm not going in, Ryder said. I'm going back to hold position and make sure Rowe doesn't clear that building before the FBI gets there. That's all. He held Torres's eyes. But if he does try to clear it, you call me. I'll call you. It wasn't a plan. It was the truth said out loud between two men who understood the difference between a plan and a promise and knew which one this situation called for. Ryder got out of the truck into the rain. He walked east. The cold came down on him immediately, soaking his jacket collar, hitting the back of his neck, and he walked with his head down and his hands in his pockets and his phone in his right hand, and he felt the weight of the morning, the sleepless hours, the trail from the Piedmont Hills to the drainage easement fence to this wet industrial street settle into his legs and his jaw, and the specific place between his shoulder blades where tension lived when it had been living there long enough to feel like structure. His phone buzzed. Dex. On Patrice's block. 2 targets in the dark car. Holding. Then Ghost. Tip confirmed received. Priority flagged. Estimated field response. 5 hours 20 minutes. 5 hours 20 minutes. He looked at the time. 6:58 a.m. 5 hours 20 minutes was 12:18 p.m. He thought about the temporary walls and the padlocked doors and the portable lighting and the folded blankets and the cardboard boxes and the word "for" in a message sent by a man who ran these things on a schedule and called them deliveries. He walked faster. Vargas met him at a corner gas station with a set of keys and no questions, the way club associates met you when Ghost had called ahead, and the call contained specific words in a specific order. Ryder took the keys and got into the car, an older Honda, dark blue, nothing notable, and drove back south toward San Leandro with the heater running and his wet jacket steaming slightly in the warmth and his eyes on the road ahead. He parked on the parallel street again. Different position this time, further east, better angle on the rear lot. Rowe's truck was still there. The panel van was still there. The third vehicle, the SUV, was still there. Interior lighting still visible through the wire glass. He sat in the Honda and watched and breathed and waited and did not allow himself to think about anything other than the next 5 hours and 4 minutes. His phone rang. Unknown number. Not the threat line. Different. He answered. Mr. Calloway. A voice he'd never heard. Male, mid-range, the careful diction of someone who'd been educated to speak precisely in high-pressure situations. My name isn't important. What's important is that I know you filed a tip 40 minutes ago, and I know what's in the evidence package you compiled, and I know where you're parked right now. A pause, metered, deliberate. We have a mutual problem. His name is Daniel Voss, and I've been building a case against him for 14 months. Another pause. I think it's time we talk directly. Ryder looked at the San Leandro building through the rain-streaked windshield, at the lit window, at Rowe's truck in the lot, at the clock on the dashboard reading 6:59 a.m. Talk, he said. The voice on the phone belonged to a man named Salas. He didn't give a first name. He gave a unit designation, Internal Affairs Division, FBI San Francisco Field Office. And he gave 14 months, which was how long he'd been building a file on Daniel Voss. And he gave a case number that Ryder had no way to verify, but that Ghost, listening on the parallel line Ryder had silently opened, was already running against every database he could reach. Salas spoke with the careful economy of a man who had rehearsed the version of this conversation that got the result he needed without giving away more than the result required. The tip you filed this morning, Salas said, landed on my desk because I have a standing flag on anything that touches Voss's name or his known associates. Carver is a known associate. The Hargrove Trust is a known instrument. A pause. You have evidence I've been trying to build legally for 14 months, and you have a location that's currently active with a window that closes before my normal response chain can move. Your normal response chain has Voss in it, Ryder said. Yes. So why should I trust the abnormal one? Because I'm calling you from a personal cell phone at 7 a.m. from a parking garage 3 miles from that building, Salas said. And I have 4 agents with me who are not in Voss's chain of command and who have been read into this investigation under a compartmentalized authorization that Voss has no visibility on. A pause that was genuinely brief. I'm not asking you to trust me, Mr. Calloway. I'm asking you to tell me if there's anything inside that building right now that can't wait 5 hours. Ryder looked at the lit window through the rain. There are 4 rooms, he said. Partitioned, padlocked. The property went active 6 hours ago. There are at least 3 men inside, including a former associate of mine who has been feeding information about my family's location to this network for the last 18 months. He stopped. I don't know if those rooms are empty yet. I don't know if they'll still be empty in 5 hours. The line was quiet for 4 seconds. Give me your exact position, Salas said. Ryder gave it. Stay in the vehicle, Salas said. Do not move on the building. I will call you back in 8 minutes. The line went dead. Ryder sat in the Honda with the heater running and the rain on the roof and his phone in his hand and 8 minutes on the clock. He called Ghost. Salas is real, Ghost said before Ryder could ask. Unit designation checks. He's been with IAD for 6 years, transferred from the Boston field office. His name shows up in a sealed proceeding from 2 years ago that I can't open, but that's consistent with a long-term internal investigation. A pause. He's not Voss's man. You're certain. Certain enough. 8 minutes was 7.5. Salas called back. We're moving in 12 minutes, Salas said. I need you to stay out of our perimeter. Whatever happens inside that building is federal jurisdiction from this point, and I need you to understand that clearly. There's a man inside named Mason Rowe. He's connected to the network through the Hargrove Trust. He also has people watching a residential address in Oakland where my daughter is currently located. Ryder's voice was flat and specific. Before your team moves on the building, I need those people pulled off that address. A brief silence. I can have Oakland PD... Not Oakland PD. The officer who responded to my daughter's school incident yesterday flagged it as a misunderstanding due to family associations. I don't know how far Voss's reach goes into the local department. The silence on Salas's end was the sound of a man absorbing a problem he hadn't anticipated and adjusting. Give me the address. I'll send one of my 4 directly there. Off book, in personal vehicle, badges only if necessary. Ryder gave him Patrice's address. Then he called Dex and told him a federal agent in a personal vehicle was going to arrive at the block in the next 20 minutes and that Dex was to confirm the agent's identity by badge number. Salas had given him a badge number. And stand down the position once confirmed. Dex said 3 words. Lily stays inside. Until I come myself, Ryder said. Nobody moves her until I'm there. Copy. Then he turned the Honda's engine off and sat in the silence of the rain and waited. The federal movement on the San Leandro building was not what movies made it look like. It was 4 cars arriving from different directions within a 2-minute window. Men in civilian jackets with badges on lanyards moving with the unhurried precision of people who'd done this enough times to know that running communicated panic, and panic was a variable that cost you control of the situation. Ryder watched it from the parallel street. He watched the rear lot sealed first, which was correct. Seal the exits before the entry. He watched the front approach go simultaneously. He watched the building's exterior lights change quality as interior lights came on at full intensity. He heard raised voices. Not many. Brief. He heard nothing that sounded like the worst version of what he'd been imagining since he'd looked at those 4 padlocked doors. 12 minutes after the federal vehicles arrived, Salas called. The rooms were empty, Salas said. Ryder closed his eyes for 3 seconds. They hadn't been used yet, Salas continued. The setup was in preparation. We have 3 men in custody, including your associate Rowe. We have the panel van. We have materials inside the building that are going to generate a significant evidentiary package. A pause. Your drive. The contents you compiled from Langford's property. We're going to need that formally. There's a process. Ghost will walk you through the chain, Ryder said. Everything is documented. Langford. He's in his house in Piedmont. He gave me 3 names voluntarily under duress, which I understand is complicated legally, but the information led directly to this building and to Rowe and to your 14 months of work, so however that gets handled. That's my problem now, Salas said. Not yours. A pause that held something Ryder hadn't expected from a federal agent, something that was close to acknowledgement, if not quite gratitude. The children in the Fremont missing persons reports, Ryder said. We've had 2 of those cases for months, Salas said quietly. The others we didn't have yet. With what you've given us, the email metadata, the trust connections, the property history, we have enough to pull the full network. A breath. It's going to take time, but we have it now. Ryder looked at the rain on the windshield. Voss, he said, being picked up at his home in the next 40 minutes by 2 agents from the D.C. office who've had an arrest warrant sealed for 6 weeks waiting for this moment. A brief pause. He won't know it's coming. Ryder sat with that for a moment. 6 weeks. Salas had been 40 minutes away from this building for 6 weeks, carrying a sealed warrant, waiting for the evidentiary thread that a motorcycle club vice president and a man in a ranch house full of servers had handed him at 7 a.m. in the rain. Your daughter, Salas said. Is she safe? She will be, Ryder said. He drove north. The drive from San Leandro to the Diamond District took 22 minutes in the rain and the morning commute, and Ryder drove it without music and without calls and without anything except the heater and the wipers and the city coming up around him through the wet gray morning. He was operating on no sleep and cold coffee and the specific kind of emptiness that follows extended adrenaline. Not exhaustion exactly, something more stripped down, the feeling of a room after a storm has moved through it and taken the furniture. He parked on Patrice's block at 8:17 a.m. Dex's bike was down the street. A second vehicle, the federal agent's personal car, a sensible gray sedan, was at the corner. The dark car that had been watching the house was gone. Ryder sat in the Honda for a moment and looked at the house, the porch light still on from the night, the front window where the gray cat was visible, as it apparently always was, as if Walter had no concept of situations that warranted remaining out of sight. He got out of the car and walked to the front door and knocked twice, which was the signal, and Hendricks opened it. Hendricks looked at him, said nothing, stepped aside. Patrice's house smelled like coffee and something baking. She was the kind of woman who baked when she was worried, a habit Ryder had observed over 11 years and never commented on, because commenting on it would have required him to acknowledge that she worried, and Patrice's dignity didn't require that acknowledgement. She was in the kitchen when he came through, a woman of 63 with gray-streaked hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a dish towel over her shoulder, and she looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup with the particular expression she reserved for moments when she wanted to say something and had decided not to. She's upstairs, Patrice said. Been up since 7. I told her you were coming. What did she say? She said she knew. He went upstairs. Lily was sitting on the bed in the guest room with her school backpack on the floor beside her and a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading. She looked up when he came through the door, and her face did the thing it did. The rapid reading, the assessment, the conclusion, and then something in her went quiet and still in the way that meant she'd found what she was looking for. You fixed it, she said. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, and she closed the book and leaned into his side the way she'd leaned into his side since she was small enough to fit entirely under his arm, and he put his arm around her and held her there and said, Yeah, Bug, it's fixed. She didn't ask him how. She was 7, and she understood already, in the way of children who grew up in close proximity to men who did difficult things quietly, that some answers were in the how and some were in the fact, and right now the fact was the one that mattered. They sat like that for a while. Through the window, the rain had softened to a fine mist that blurred the street outside into something watercolor and indistinct. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at nothing. The smell of Patrice's baking came up the stairs in warm waves. Are we going home? Lily asked. In a little while. Is it safe now? He thought about Salas, about the sealed warrant, about Rowe in federal custody and Voss being walked out of his home 40 minutes from now by agents from D.C., about the network that had used a shell trust and a decommissioned building and a man's wounded pride as its instruments, and was now the problem of people whose specific job it was to dismantle things like it. Yeah, he said, it's safe. She nodded against his arm, accepted it. Then, after a moment, Daddy? Yeah. The man who tried to put me in his car. Her voice was careful, the way she got careful around things she'd been sitting with for a while. Did he think nobody would care? Because of us? He looked at the wall across the room, at the framed print Patrice had there. A landscape, mountains, generic and calm. Yeah, he said. He thought that. That's stupid, Lily said. He pulled her in slightly tighter. Yeah, Bug. It is. He took her home at 10 a.m., back to the house in the district that wasn't much to look at, and that she'd been born into and that she navigated with the ownership of a child who'd never questioned whether it was home. She went directly to her room, changed out of her school clothes, and came back down in jeans and a sweatshirt and asked if they could watch a movie. And Ryder said yes, and they watched a movie about a dog and a road trip that he didn't follow at all, but that she watched with complete investment, curled into the couch beside him with her feet tucked under his leg the way she always positioned herself. And he sat there in the ordinary weight of it and let the morning decompress. By noon, Ghost had confirmed that Daniel Voss had been taken into federal custody at 9:43 a.m. By 1 p.m., Langford's attorney had filed a cooperation agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office. By 2, the Fremont Missing Persons Task Force had been formally absorbed into the federal investigation, and 3 case detectives who'd been hitting walls for 18 months were being read into evidence they hadn't known existed. Ryder didn't learn most of this in real time. Ghost sent a summary in the late afternoon, concise, documented, the way Ghost communicated everything. Information as architecture, no editorial, no drama. Ryder read it at the kitchen table while Lily did homework across from him, her sneakers kicked off and her feet up on the chair rungs, her pencil moving with the concentrated effort of a second grader working through a math sheet that was just at the edge of her current ability. He read the summary twice and put his phone face down on the table. 7 times 8, Lily said without looking up. 56. I knew that. She wrote it down anyway. That evening, Ryder drove to the garage. He wasn't sure why exactly. There was nothing there that required his presence, nothing operational, no decision to be made. He drove there because it was where the night had started, and something in him needed to close the circle, the way a man walks back through a building after an alarm to make sure each room is what it appears to be. The bay was lit. That was the first thing. He'd expected the place to be dark, locked up, but the lights were on in the main bay, and when he rolled the door, he found his brothers there. Not all of them. Cabo was absent, was home asleep by now, he hoped, but the core of them. Dex at the workbench, Torres sitting on the stool by the parts room, Priest in the folding chair he'd been occupying for most of the last 20 hours, a cup of something in his hands. Nobody had coordinated this. Nobody had called a meeting. They were here because this was where they came when something had happened that needed to sit somewhere before it became the past, and this was the place where things sat. The coffee pot was on. The garage smelled like it always smelled: motor oil, metal, old leather, the ghost of cigarettes. The overhead lights hummed their specific hum. Outside, the rain had stopped completely and left the street wet and reflective and very quiet. Ryder poured a cup and leaned against the workbench, and nobody said anything for a while. Torres broke it first. Not with much. Roe. Federal custody, Ryder said. San Leandro property. Salas has him. Torres nodded. He looked at the floor for a moment. 4 years. Yeah. He was here 4 years. Yeah. What Torres meant by that was not an accusation and not a question. It was the particular statement a man makes when he's absorbing the specific grief of discovering that something he trusted contained something that couldn't be trusted. And the grief isn't about betrayal so much as it's about the arithmetic of it. 4 years of shared road, shared risk, shared table, and on the other side of that, a man who'd decided it was a transaction and found his buyers. It wasn't the club he sold, Ryder said. He sold me, my patterns, my daughter's school, my route. He made himself useful to people who needed to know how to apply pressure to a specific point. Because of the vote, Dex said. Because of a story he needed to believe about the vote. Ryder turned the coffee cup in his hands. He needed it to be something it wasn't, so he made it something he could use. Priest was looking at his own cup. He'd been quiet since Ryder had come through the door. A different quality of quiet than his usual, less contained, more the kind that came after something had been felt at full volume and was settling into its permanent place. The kids, he said. The ones in Fremont. The investigation is open. Federal now. Full resources. Salas said the evidentiary package is strong enough to pull the whole network. Ryder looked at Priest directly. It's not finished, but it's in motion and it won't stop. Priest looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once. Not with relief exactly, with the specific quiet of someone absorbing a thing they'd needed to hear confirmed. He looked back at his cup. Your sister, Ryder said. Yeah. Priest's voice was low. I'll call her tomorrow. Nobody pressed it. Nobody elaborated. The things that mattered in this room had never required elaboration. Dex picked up a rag from the workbench and looked at it and put it back down. The garage camera across the street. Salas's team pulled the hardware this afternoon. Ghost had included that in the summary. Evidence chain. So we're clean. We're clean. Dex looked at the rag, then at Ryder. And us. What Dex was asking was not whether they were legally exposed, though that was in it. He was asking the fuller version, whether what they'd done in the last 24 hours, the fence they'd gone over and the study they'd walked into and the computer they'd copied and the building they'd surveilled and the chain of decisions that had led a man named Salas to a sealed warrant on a deadline, whether all of that had landed correctly, whether the shape of it was right. Ryder thought about Langford in the chair, about his own hand on the back of his waistband and the distance between where it rested and where it didn't go, about the drive in Ghost's possession and the tip filed at 7 a.m. and the 4 rooms in a San Leandro building that had been empty when the federal team moved through them. We're clean, he said. Dex held his eyes for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee. They stayed there for another hour, not talking much. The radio came on at some point. Ryder didn't register who turned it on. Something low and classic, the kind of track that had been playing in garages since before any of them were old enough to be in garages. And the sound of it filled the space the way familiar things fill spaces. Not with meaning, but with continuity. The fact of it. The persistence of it. Outside, the wet street reflected the garage lights in long orange pools. Somewhere on the waterfront, a ship's horn sounded once, navigational, carrying through the cleared post-rain air with unusual clarity. The city went about its business in the way cities did, indifferent to the specific weight of what any given building had held the night before, indifferent to the men inside it, indifferent to everything that hadn't happened because the rooms were empty in time. Ryder finished his coffee. He thought about calling the garage home and decided it wasn't the right word. Not home. Something older than home. The place where the people were, which was the thing that mattered and which didn't require a cleaner name. He set the empty cup on the workbench. I need to get back to Lily, he said. Nobody said anything about that. Nobody needed to. He drove back through Oakland in the post-rain dark, the streets shining, the city ordinary in every direction. And when he came through his own front door, she was on the couch under a blanket with the TV on low, half asleep, her hair loose and her school backpack already by the door for tomorrow morning. She heard him come in and opened her eyes and looked at him and closed them again, the way she did when the thing she'd been waiting for had arrived, and she could let go of whatever she'd been holding. He turned off the TV. He adjusted the blanket. He sat in the chair across from her and listened to her breathe. Outside, one by one, 5 Harleys rolled slowly down the block. Not roaring, not announcing, just rolling, slow, the deep idle of engines that had covered a lot of ground and weren't in a hurry anymore, passing the house the way men passed a place when they wanted to say something without saying it. He heard them without moving from the chair. He heard them move down the block, and the sound diminish and the street go quiet again. The city was cold, and it was dark, and it didn't care what had happened in it the night before. But in a house on a quiet Oakland street, a 7-year-old girl slept soundly, and the men who'd been there when it mattered were already gone, back into the dark where they lived, carrying their scars and their loyalty and the specific weight of what dangerous men choose to do with the damage inside them when someone small and innocent is standing in the road. They hadn't been heroes, they hadn't been clean, they'd been what they were, flawed and scarred and shaped by things that left marks, and they had stood between a child and the darkness with everything they had. That was enough. That was exactly enough.